Welcome to Feedstuffs and Beef Magazine. I'm Ann Hess. Despite turbulence in the last quarter of the year, cattle markets ended 2025 strong. Tight cattle supplies, decreased beef production, and strong demand are expected to continue, supporting and elevating cattle and beef prices. Joining us to discuss this year's cattle and beef market outlook from CattleCon 2026 in Nashville is Brian Earnest with CoBank. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Great to be here with you, Ann.
So we're kicking off the year here. What's the market signaling? Is the focus on calf production?
Yeah, it's been an interesting couple of years, and really there's been some influences that are outside influences on the producer. Weather has been one of those. We've seen higher feed cost environment that has played into expectations. That seems to have improved some this year, but still there's other things that are impacting at the producer level that are much of the same, right? We've got, the average age of the cattle producer in the U.S. I think is 58 years old today. We're not quite making enough new cattle ranchers, I think is kind of the one of the questions out there. On top of that, capital costs continue to be higher. Labor remains a challenge in the animal protein sector in general, but specifically kind of at the ranch level, hearing that continues to be an issue. Overall, these things continue to combine to, a high level of optimism when it comes to the beef side of the business, but on the cattle side, still not expecting that we're going to see really that rebuilding process start to take place in 2026. The jury's still out there, but at least the numbers that we're seeing from a high-level standpoint, what USDA just came out with their new cattle inventory report suggested we're not quite there yet in terms of looking at an expansion in the U.S. cattle sector.
How about herd productivity, keeping some of those disease challenges out? Are we expecting to see some low culling rates this year?
Yeah, I guess that's one that, I don't spend a whole lot of time looking at, but I do hear that, maybe there's less pressure on that and some newer prevalence in technology that maybe helps out with some of these factors. Certainly, if you look at the last 2 decades, there's been a lot of genetic improvements that have really played a role in the beef segment, but also, when we're talking about herd productivity, and also from a disease standpoint, seem to be in a better position. So those things, to me, spell optimism when we look at the producer level.
So we're seeing some strong prices. If you think there's any level of restocking going to happen, or are we going to see some herd growth this year?
Could happen, right? We might be to a point where we start to see this thing turn over a little bit. I think most of the analysts that I've been talking to don't really have a strong foundation or expectation that that's going to start making a really, a strong impact even this year, maybe even next year, not really having a strong impact on our total head count. If we do start seeing some rebuilding, that means fewer head count for beef production, or for beef at the end of the day, right? So if we're starting to retain heifers, it means fewer cattle available to go into the processing space. So overall, I think at the consumer level, if that's what we're concerned about and thinking about this really strong demand that we're seeing, the beef supply, probably expectation is going to be about the same as what we had last year.
Domestic demand, is it still loud and clear for beef? Is it over other proteins, even though it's at higher prices at retail, at restaurants? Are we going to see any competition there?
This has been really interesting to watch, and kind of as an observer, as an analyst, for a number of years we were really concerned with what was going on the supply side to give us expectations of what we're going to see from a production and demand standpoint. Really the demand was kind of all right, this is a given. We're not going to see much change. But I think the turnover in the genetic makeup of the herd, the improvement that the consumer's seeing in terms of U.S. beef quality, if you look at today versus 25 years ago, that really has brought the consumer to the table. And I think when consumers are shopping for their protein, they're thinking of really 4 top components there: quality, freshness, taste, nutrition. These things really kind of sit at the top of what they're looking for. Beef has delivered on quality, and they've delivered it in a space where the U.S. consumer has greater access to high-quality beef today than they ever have in the past, really. It's the convenience factor of it, and I think of that when I say that statement. thinking of going to maybe my local Walmart to see prime grade beef on the shelf versus 25 years ago I had to go to a strong butcher shop or high-end steak joint to get that same level of quality.
It's right there at our fingertips.
Yeah.
So exports, we're still locked out of China. How is that impacting our shipments out, and are we seeing maybe some other countries picking up that slack?
Yeah, I think the trade situation has really kind of been up in the air the last couple of years. This story really dials back, I think, traces back to 2019 when China had African swine fever and how that impacted their pork availability. And at that moment, I think it was something like a 25% reduction in China's swine herd occurred as a result of ASF. They rebuilt their pork production rather rapidly through that time frame, and I think it was more rapid than most folks on a global scale were thinking about. At the same time, that backfilling of animal protein into China, there was a lot more beef going into China and a lot more chicken. So the consumer there also recognized that, hey, I don't necessarily just want to eat pork anymore. I do want to eat other animal proteins, and beef has kind of taken a stronghold with consumers throughout the globe, but also specifically in China. So I think the demand there, the ask is there, but there's political tensions that probably are getting in the way of that product getting to where it needs to go. On the flip side of that, we've got really strong domestic demand, and the consumer here in the U.S. is saying, hey, I want more beef than what you can produce for me. So certainly more of it can stay home in this kind of more difficult trade situation from a global standpoint.
So as we look towards the rest of the year, is there any consumer trends regarding beef that producers should keep their eye on?
I think food in general is one of these things that we're always kind of seeing, like asking the question of, are we headed for an area where we have a new fad diet coming into play or something like that? Protein is having a moment right now, and I think this is a long-term trend where, if you look at, I saw some survey data recently that listed out all the different diet trends of, what consumers were looking for, and at the bottom of that was vegan. And this was a diet trend. I think if you look back 20 years ago, that was very popular. Folks were thinking, I need to go vegan. At the very top was, how do I get more protein in my diet? And I think this is one of those trends that we are seeing really resonates strongly with the consumer, and something that it will carry into 26 and beyond. So through this year, we'll continue to see that. The question is, I think probably over the last 4 or 5 years, popularity of different cuts has kind of changed, where folks were looking for ribeyes, 4 or 5 years ago. Well, now if they were more expensive this year, they may be trading within the category of what they're wanting to put on the grill. And this year, I think, thinking about what folks are going to be putting on the grill this summer. I know it's still cold and a lot of snow in many parts of the country, but folks are still dusting off the grills in some areas. They'll be thinking about different cuts and how to do that. A lot of that probably will be led by different retailers offering different items. So that it's always curious to see what the work is that's being done at the consumer level, and that may be one area where we see some flexibility and creativity pop up this year.
Well, I mean, with the rise of the Ozempic, Wegovy, all those, people don't maybe need as much protein as they once wanted to have on their plate.
Yeah, this is one thing that I find really interesting. The GLP-1 drugs, and this is, we are starting to see some consumer changes in consumer behavior show up in purchasing behavior, specifically at the food space. And you're right, so GLP-1 users, their caloric intake content is lower, but they're seeking out more protein in their diet, right? And I think when I think about what's going on in the beef space, they added on the U.S. beef supply system, I think somewhere around 23 pounds to the cattle weights last year, and 27 pounds the year before. And if you trace that back to 2009, they've only added 100 pounds in that time frame. So they added about 50 pounds in just the last 2 years, about half of what they've done since 2009. What that has translated into is not necessarily more ribeyes on the hanging carcass. It's more beef availability, but not necessarily the things that people have been asking for. When we get to GLP-1 usage, they're looking for smaller portion size, right? It doesn't necessarily resonate with a 22-ounce ribeye if they're only looking for a 4-ounce portion. I think there's an opportunity here. It's a challenge. You've got the quality there, but thinking about how do we get that portion size fitting right with this expanded group. Last year I heard that GLP-1 usage is in 20% of U.S. households now. There's at least one user in 20% of the U.S. households now. And that's up from where it was the year before. It's a pretty strong expansion. And so this is an area that I think we're going to only continue to see more focus on from a consumer standpoint. And if you go into the grocery store today and you start looking around at all the options that GLP-1 users have and the marketing that's going into it, opportunity, I think, for beef to take a look at. So I don't know that I have the answer there, but it's certainly...
Maybe chislic would be a smaller bite to go with. As we wrap up our discussion here today, any key takeaways, final thoughts to leave our audience?
I really think that the exceptional demand that beef has gotten from the consumer is a really interesting story. It's fascinating for me, somebody who's not from production agriculture, to really kind of see what's going on in this space. It's a remarkable story. I think moving forward, there's a lot to be optimistic about, despite all the challenges at the producer level and throughout the system, to really kind of get that demand supply situation correct. And it's a moving target. It's absolutely fascinating to see what's going on there. And I think continue to be, hold your head up about what you've been doing in the industry and work forward with it.
Brian Earnest, CoBank, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insight.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
For you and our audience, we thank you for tuning in. For more coverage and conversations from CattleCon 2026, be sure to check out the Feedstuffs and Beef Magazine websites, as well as our social media channels. For Feedstuffs and Beef, I'm Ann Hess.